Diana Theisinger. I'm Steely's Digital and Professional Learning Program Manager. And this week we are talking about changing one thing in a different way than we've talked about it in season 1. We're going to be talking about changing a mindset level thing. So changing the general approach to the way that discussions happen and maybe all assignments happen in the age of generative AI. And I am joined today by...
So I'm Beverly Scher. I'm teaching faculty in the chemistry department, and I've been teaching what was first a W freshman seminar, so writing and reading and discussion intensive, started in 1996. It's called Emerging Diseases. I'm still teaching it. It has converted itself into a Call 150, but I've taught over 100 sections of it, and it has changed with time.
Okay, so you mentioned this unique to William and Mary term, Call 150. What is that? And you've been here since that became a thing.
Right.
Okay.
Since before that was a thing.
Yeah, since before that was a thing.
So a Call 150 is an opportunity to weave writing into the curriculum. It's a replacement in some ways for Writing 101. At least that was how it evolved. So they're reading, writing, and discussion intensive seminar style, limited to 15 or 16 students. Different people do it differently. I've always emphasized class discussion, small group work, student presentations. But students also write 2 big formal pieces of writing, both with revisions, so a book review and also a library research paper. And it's worked really well, but I've made lots of changes over the years.
Okay, and that's what we're talking about today is some of the changes that you've made over the years. You don't have to limit yourself to Call 150 discussion in this, but I'm interested to hear what are some of your lessons learned in your career as an instructor in higher ed?
So I think at the top of the list for me is center the students. It's really important to know what they're thinking. It's important to be able to improvise as you deal with individuals in a particular class. So I've taught more than 100 sections of my course. I've never taught the same thing twice, even in semesters when I'm teaching 2 sections. It goes the way it goes because of the readings and because of who's in the room. And that's one of the joyous things about it, actually. It does not get boring.
Yeah, I was thinking that when you said you taught 100 sections that, you must be tired of, the same thing again and again, but because that mix of students changes.
Right, and because I've picked a topic that really moves. So emerging infectious diseases was interesting back in 1996 when we were talking about Ebola and Marburg and AIDS, and it was interesting during COVID, and now it's interesting again because of the changes in public health attitudes post-COVID. So the thing evolves along with the news.
Yeah.
And current events are a big part of the course.
And are you still able to sleep at night?
I just lie awake over different things.
Okay, so tell us about how generative AI has affected the ways that you teach. And I know you have a kind of a strategy that you are maybe, did you say you haven't changed this thing yet, but you're planning to?
Basically, generative AI sort of entered my life because I have a son who's a data scientist at Quora in Silicon Valley. And in the fall, I want to say of 2023, he said, "Mom, you need to know about ChatGPT." And he sat me down and we played with it. And I thought, wow, this is really going to affect the way we teach writing. And I've been increasingly aware that my students are probably more sophisticated, at least some of them, in their awareness of what's available. They have used it more than I have. And I think I've been concerned that we're going to lose things if we start just generating text via AI and calling it writing, because I don't think it's writing. Okay. And I also am concerned about students losing. I think I've read that this generation is less likely to read books than even students 10 years ago. And I think it's probably true based on what I hear from my students. And I'm thinking we are really losing something important about thinking if we're not reading and we're not actually writing. So I've had to rethink the assignments in my course. I think we probably need to sit down as a faculty and think about what it means for writing at William & Mary, that AI is existing and is increasingly powerful. So I want to talk about something I've always done, But I also want to talk about my new mantra, which is rethink. Rethink everything.
Okay, rethink everything would be a really good subtitle for change one thing. I like that. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So tell us.
So I have a
what you
trivial example, and then I have an example that goes all the way back to the beginning of the course. So the trivial example is, as we all know, at least those of us who've been teaching in the spring of 2025, we've lost a lot of days to snow, which was really unfortunate. And in particular, I lost the first class days for both sections of my Call 150 of emerging diseases and for my Call 400, which is a small seminar in chemistry that writing intensive, discussion intensive. And first days really matter. They set the tone, they help build community, and I thought, what am I going to do? Okay. And so I am really reluctant to get behind. So what I said to myself was, okay, I'm actually going to ask my freshmen to do the first assignment for the first day. So the first assignment was to watch a frontline video on the 2013 to 2015 Ebola epidemic in West Africa. Killed a very large number of people. It was by far the largest outbreak we've ever seen because it made it into an urban environment and spread across 3 countries. And lots of reasons that happened. But the frontline episode is really gripping. So footage from real life. There is an image that someone in West Africa took in a rural area using an old iPad. And it's basically an examination of someone who's dying of Ebola. So you get to see what that looks like. And that's really gripping. And we look at how various governments responded, and most of them did not do a great job because in crisis that things fall apart. And so I said, okay, you've got to watch this thing. And then I want you to write up a set of discussion points. And we do discussion points in my class for everything. So it could be a reading assignment. It could be a viewing assignment. It could be something where you go out and watch or listen to a podcast. The reason I started with discussion points was I wanted the shy people to have something to say. Speaking as a recovering shy person, I like to think about what I'm going to say before I say it. And it's very hard to do that in a way that feels safe in a group discussion because things go fast. And so the extroverts dominate and the shy people sit on their hands like I used to. And I thought that was not good. So I just said, okay, comments, questions about what you just saw, but don't summarize because summary's boring because everybody watched it. And then brought them into class on the first day. They'd all written their discussion points because there was a rubric for that on the Blackboard site. And they were a little nervous about this because, oh my gosh, new people and this new approach to doing things. And I spent about 3 minutes going over a few basic course rules, like if we're in discussion, you can talk, but you got to raise your hand first. I'm going to call on you. So some basic classroom norms. And then I said, okay, get into small groups. We're just going to do it geographically. I want about 3 people per group, you, and you, you, and you. And then I said, what I want you to do is go through everybody's discussion points and come up with a group list of take-home messages from that video. And I thought, these people don't know each other. This is going to be weird. They were fabulous. They were so enthusiastic. And there was laughing and loud talking. And I was, of course, eavesdropping because I always do. And they were being really productive. And after 15 minutes or so out of a 50-minute period, they were pretty much done. And we went around the room and debriefed it. So each group got to contribute one of those things. I put them up on the board. We got to look at them and think about them. And by the end of the hour, they had bonded. They understood one of the basic assignments. They knew what we were going to be talking about over the course of the semester. They had a sense for how the day was going to go. I had achieved more in that first day than I normally did. So I thought, I am so doing this next semester.
There is so much to unpack in this example because some of it was you just making a really intuitive, experience-informed pivot.
Right, seat of the pants.
Yeah. But you've done this a couple times before, so you kind of had some background knowledge about what could work. But you flipped the content that didn't matter for them to do in person. You provided a rubric so that your expectations were really transparent. You headed off their inclination to summarize rather than engage because you knew that was coming after teaching 100 sections. You were like, we've all watched the video. We don't need to know what it's about. And then I think really brilliant too is the putting them in the small groups because you're further lowering the stakes.
Yes.
of, there's, I might
they
have
have
written
to
down
talk
the
to
wrong
each other, but they
thing,
don't have to talk to the whole room.
Yeah. And then by the time they're coming back to the whole group, there's some consensus building that's happened and, some processing work that is really supportive even for those introverts or people who just need a little bit more time to
And the
think and
introverts in the
process.
small groups did not need to be the people reporting back. They could look to the extrovert in the group who wanted to talk, but their ideas were getting reported. I was actually really pleased with the way that worked.
How has classroom community evolved since that moment?
I think we started weeks ahead, and we have stayed there.
Yeah.
And students often refer back to that video. Remember when we watched that video and we saw this? It's just like this thing we just read about.
And you, as the, learning experience designer for them, presumably put that video up front for a reason, because
of course.
you knew there was a through line to where you were going. So really thoughtful there to have that touch point for them to all come back to.
It's really important to use good content, because if it's engaging, it's not just let's talk about what is known about Ebola. No, let's show us what Ebola does. So many different directions it can go, and all of them are productive. I have learned in my many years of teaching discussion-based seminars that if it's important, it will come up. And I can guide it based on the reading, but I have learned to just surrender the idea that we're going to cover X on a certain day. X will get covered, but it might not be in the way that I expected.
Okay, I have 15 follow-up questions about that idea, but for the purpose of this kind of strategy, how do you think of this discussion points strategy in your teaching toolkit? Do you think of it as...
So it is actually my secret weapon. I use it in every course that I teach now. So I've taught a microbiota seminar with Professor Forsyth in biology. We did that multiple times. I'm currently teaching a Call 400 microbiota-related seminar in chemistry as a capstone. I teach a Call 100, so it's called Atoms to Cells, and it's about where did life come from, but it's also lots of small group work and estimation, and we read. Every time we read, I have students do discussion points, because it's a way of organizing their thinking. It's a way of encouraging them to think more deeply. They're encouraged to ask questions as opposed to, saying, oh, this, summary. And I think students aren't very good at asking questions. I've noticed that the questions get a lot better once they've had some practice and then seen what other people came up with during discussion. So, as I said, initially discussion points were really something for the shy people. But what I've learned is that these do other things too. So they force students to engage with the reading. And I pick interesting books. And what I make it clear is that there is no bad question. There is no bad comment. But, write down things that you actually want to bring up in class. It's not about filling the front side of that sheet of paper that is all I'm willing to allow you to fill. It's about, pick some interesting stuff. What's interesting to you? And it's really interesting to see what different people pick up on.
Yeah.
Another thing that I want them doing is communicating with me. And so they type out their discussion points and then they hand them in. And then I spend a happy half hour per section reading through them, saying, good, or answering questions that I know aren't going to get brought up again. Just so I get a chance to engage with every student multiple times a week. And we've had back channel conversations about things they don't want to bring up in class. So creationism. I've had multiple students who, were raised as creationists and are, some of them still are and some of them are questioning, and they do not want to bring that up in class because they feel as though they'll be tagged as something, oncology or something. I don't know what it is. But they can have that safe conversation with me just through writing.
Okay, so the discussion point strategy, it is a kind of a pre-work strategy.
So it's flipped classroom. This is a flipped classroom strategy. So we don't go over content in class. We discuss things in class. So, you'll get a section of the book that we're reading. You'll need to fill out your set of discussion points. You'll bring it to class and we will see where the discussion goes. I don't show videos in class. I don't give planned lectures. There'll be little impromptu things. Someone will ask a question and I say, for this, we need to draw the HIV life cycle. So here is my sketch of it on the board, and I'll give you a better handout on Friday. But you catch them being curious, and then you give them things. And discussion points facilitate that, because the questions are so much better than they would be if it were just, we sort of read the article kind of, and, someone's going to ask a question. Everybody's prepared.
Yeah, it makes me think that you're co-creating the schema with them, because you're giving them some context.
Yep.
You're pushing their thinking a little bit. Yep. It's a supportive strategy for students with learning disabilities, for first-generation students who have no idea what a freshman seminar is going to feel like or what is appropriate to say. Gives you an opportunity for some formative feedback along the way. Does this work better with these small groups where you really know the students, or have you tried it in a large class?
The largest group I've worked with is the Call 100. So that was 26 students.
Okay.
And it still works.
Okay. But probably if you were teaching
I think it would be really
120.
hard. So it would depend on the kind of course. So when I taught immunology, it was lecture, and I would talk about experiments, right? Because understanding where the science comes from is a lot better than saying, okay, this is true, and this is true, and this is true. So, and then students would do problems. Which I written, because we learn by doing problems, but that's outside of class. But so I don't think discussion points work with textbooks. They're very cut and dried. Textbooks are. And so they work with scientific papers. I've discovered that in my Call 400 courses. Some discussion points on the paper we just read. And sometimes it's, what are the implications of this for diabetes treatment? And sometimes it's, I really don't understand figure 1F. Can we go through it?
Ooh.
Which is great. Either thing works. But I think it works best, at least at the 100 level, if you use trade books, which I've always done. So there are wonderful science writers out there. David Quammen writes amazing books about virology. And that's what we start with. So if it's a science writer who's trying to engage a curious and smart general audience, that's probably right.
Okay. Or videos, as you said.
Video. This generation likes video.
Yes.
And I
do too.
Some video is fine. Some of it I find way too slow. So I like reading, and I want my students to be better readers. So I will give them some videos occasionally, but it's going to be heavy on the reading. But it's going to be good reading. It's going to be fun reading. And when students say, that was a fun book, maybe I'll try some more books, I'm going, yes, I have done something good here.
Definitely. Okay. All right. That's wonderful.
So let's talk about it in terms of the whole pivot to the AI world.
Yeah.
Because everything I just said would have been fine 50 years ago, right? It all would have worked, even back then. Now what I think I'm facing is a situation where students resist reading, or at least some of them do. Students feel as though they don't have any time. And it turns out that it's really hard to make a good set of discussion points using ChatGPT.
Ooh.
It's really, really difficult because the discussion points evolve as class discussion evolves. So they unconsciously write about things that they don't know, because they're taking the other stuff as a given. And, yes, there are PDFs of some of the books available, and you could feed that into an appropriate model and get it to generate some interesting questions. That is more work than just reading the book. So I've had a few situations where I was pretty sure that someone was generating their stuff through some kind of an LLM. And I knew it because the questions weren't germane. So I brought my grading rubric here. So I have a check and a 0. It is very simple. And so I say, for a check, the discussion points have to be clear and interesting and pertinent to the reading assignment. And a 0, there are ways to get a 0, 3 ways. So the first is discussion points merely summarize the reading assignment. Okay, because I don't want summary, I want them thinking. And ChatGPT is good at summary. Okay. Next, it's discussion points are sparse, shallow, superficial, and or vague. ChatGPT is often vague. Okay, and the third is discussion points are unrelated to the reading assignment. And that's what I have seen in the few instances where I was pretty sure someone was using it. It's, we read something about the way mitochondria work. And it's, general vague crap about mitochondria. I'm pretty sure they didn't read it, but I've never have had to say, I think you didn't read the assignment. I think that you used an LLM for this. I've just said, that wasn't on topic. Your discussion points need to be on topic, and I have to give you a 0 because it wasn't on topic, and they wise up. And a couple of times, students have sort of tried to defend themselves and said, I didn't have time. And I thought, confirmation. Right. So I think it basically makes them read. And read in a thoughtful way, and it means that they don't have that AI shortcut. Nothing is AI proof, but this is AI resistant. And I think the other thing I've thought about is how I frame discussion points. And I think what I want to start doing, and I'm still working on this, I want to frame them as a tool as opposed to a product. So this is to help you do a better job of thinking about the reading and talking about it in class. And, there's not going to be anything that's perfect. We're not aiming for perfect here. We're aiming for useful. And I think maybe that will help.
Yeah. And those are that's really well aligned with two of the strategies we talk about with instructors about not AI proofing anything, but about kind of mitigating the use of AI. And so one is being transparent with your students about why you are asking them to do this thing. And then the other is making whatever task you're asking them to do highly connected and relevant to things that have already happened in class, to readings and discussion, to where it is going to be more work to get AI's help than to just use your brain to do the work.
Well, and less interesting too.
Yeah.
You're missing out if you're not doing this reading.
Yes, and I do think that our students, for the most part, really believe in the value proposition of higher education. We're not having to sell them on it's worth your time to do this because they want to learn. They want to, benefit. And in many cases, they have had a choice of which classes they could be taking to meet this requirement.
Absolutely.
And they've chosen this topic because it's interesting.
Well, and they also know that emerging diseases is one of the most demanding Hall 150s at William & Mary. I am always told about what is said about, me on Rate My Professor. No, it's actually good. This is really hard. This is a lot of work, but it's really interesting. And I'm going, yes, I want the person who would be attracted by that.
Yeah. Are you going in there and seeding some of the...
Fortunately, I have a brother-in-law who reports for me. So
that's
so
good.
I
never read your own press, right?
Oh, geez. It's like having PPE, really good PPE between me and that. But I think, there are many ways to do the Call 150 requirement, and some students are going to go for the easy way out. I was the pre-med advisor here for 25 years, and I know how anxious students are about grades. And, with good reason, they're anxious about grades, but I don't want the grade to be the shiny plastic trophy that they end up taking home instead of the really great experience.
And knowing how to think.
I want them to know how to think. I really do. And I want them to know how to really write. I want them to know how to communicate.
Yeah.
And text generation is not communication.
So let's talk about the idea of ways that you are rethinking your teaching in general related to generative AI.
So I am firmly convinced of the value of reading and writing and thinking about an audience and communication in general. And I am very concerned that students who use AI to generate products, I just made a term paper in 3 seconds or less, are missing out. They are not learning what they need to learn from their college experience. So I think I need to be better about communicating why I have the assignments I have. I need to think about the structure of the assignments that I'm giving to students. A lot of it's framing, but it's also thinking about what I'm doing. So,
what are some of your initial thoughts on ways that you need to approach assignments or communication with students differently related to generative AI?
So I think there is the sort of defensive approach, which I've heard from a lot of my colleagues. How can I keep them from doing this? Right. But I think the question we ought to be asking is, could they generate the product using AI without having to read, without having to think? Could they get away with doing that? And if they could, then why are we asking them to do it? Okay. And It might mean that we need to be better about explaining why we're asking them to do it. It might be that we need to be very thoughtful about how we design the endpoint in such a way that it would be very difficult to do with AI. But I think that would also enrich it. So I think question every aspect of the assignment. And if you discover that, oh my gosh, I'm asking them to write the same boring essay that I wrote 50 years ago when I was, and 15 years old in language arts or something, we're probably doing something wrong there. We probably do need to refresh it. So I'm a big fan of Rethink.
Yeah, I think it's a balancing act because, I think about my experience with Google Maps, and we talk about this Google Maps effect. I have a terrible sense of direction. I am so reliant on it. So I think there, are times where I'm like, oh, I wish I just was a little bit more. I wish I had built that muscle a little bit more for directionality.
Yes, right. And I think we are losing things like that. Yeah. And fortunately, I've never made the transition to Google Maps. I still find myself wishing for a paper map because I need to be able to chart that course for myself. I do not let my phone tell me where to go because I don't trust it. Okay. And I don't trust AI either. Honestly, I've played with it enough to know that it hallucinates, and it hallucinates really weird things. And it can change tone. It can change the direction of a piece of writing in a way that's generally not what you wanted.
Yeah. And I think it's so important to communicate that with our students too, because many of them are using AI. You previewed this in our earlier part of our discussion. They're using it in a moment of desperation.
Absolutely.
They're stressed for time. Yep. They're worried that their grade is going to suffer. And so they fall back on that tool and don't always recognize some of the inherent constraints of those
the limitations that those things bring with them. I don't want them to lose the ability to think on their own. Yeah. I don't want them to lose the ability to read and synthesize and go farther.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be sad. And I think it would hurt them in later life.
Sure.
It's really good to be able to think when the power goes out.
Yeah. Or beyond that, if you're giving a presentation in front of a group of actual live audience people, you might have your discussion points to refer to, but you're probably not pulling out your phone to ask ChatGPT what you should say next.
No. Why are you giving this presentation if ChatGPT could replace you?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Such a great point.
So, yeah. So, rethink.
Thank you so much for joining us today. A lot of times on this show, we talk about quick strategies that instructors can implement right away. I think the things we talked about today are bigger than those quick strategies, and they are going to take a little bit more of a mindset shift, but it still fits in that category of changing the way that you're thinking about or rethinking about your assignments and your teaching, and just on that path to continuously being better and more engaging with our students and staying relevant. Okay. Even after 100 sections.
Over 100.
Over 100 sections.